All right, so with us here today, actually presenting, we have Vincent DePaul Schmidt. He's currently the superintendent of Catholic schools for the Diocese of Toledo, Ohio. Prior to that, he served as superintendent for the Diocese of Wheeling, Charleston, West Virginia. He was a former associate superintendent of the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph, Missouri. And in addition, he has served in various other administrative capacities in Catholic schools within the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri, and the Belleville and Springfield Diocese in Illinois for 19 years. And he's served in such roles as Director of Academic Affairs, School Principal, Chief Operating Officer, and has administrative experience at the high school, middle school, and elementary school levels. All right, next to him is Matt Russell. Matt serves currently as the National Catholic Education Association as the Director of Institutional Advancement. In that role, he's responsible for all fundraising, partnership, and business development activities for NCEA. He speaks nationally on topics of advancement in school management and leadership. Prior to this, he served as the Executive Director of the Secondary Schools Department for NCEA. And before that, Russell worked in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, where he was the Director of Secondary Education and Financial Aid. During his time there, he worked closely with high schools in the area of enrollment management, financial aid, and program implementation. Additionally, Mr. Russell has served as a principal, vice principal, and teacher in K-8 schools within the Archdiocese of Washington. He has degrees in political science, business, and educational leadership and administration from George Washington University in St. John's. But this afternoon, Jacqueline Day is going to be presenting. She works in the marketing department for Fax Renweb and is a frequent speaker at industry events with over 10 years of experience in private education. She's passionate about the study of marketing, ed technology, enrollment, and retention at K-12 institutions. Prior to joining RedWeb in 2009, she worked in Washington, D.C., where she specialized in public affairs. Jacqueline received her BA in public communication from Washington Adventist University. She lives and works in the D.C. metro area.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. Thank you for inviting us here. Jim, again, as always, thank you, and thanks everybody for the Fax team for your continued partnership with everything. So I'm Matt Russell. Charles is how I screen my phone calls at work, and the bio that she has is just slightly out of date. I'm a newly minted Chief Advancement Officer for the organization, so that's just a focus on, on the business side of providing services to Catholic schools, which is NCEA's focus. Everybody in the back, we good on sound? I don't need a mic, do I? Right. Okay.
Got right there. You had a clicker?
I got it over there.
Okay. Didn't know.
Got it click.
Thank you, sir.
Come on. All right. So we're here today, and we're going to talk about effective school management, and that's that's not really why we all got into here. Quick show of hands. How many people here, when they went to school, said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get an education degree, and I'm going to run a multi-million-dollar business"? How many people said that's what I want to do when I was 18? Anybody? Right. Me either. Okay. But the fact is, that's what we do. Okay. If we like it or not, that is one of the realities that we face. Now, so we need to make sure that we're doing that part of the job right. Is it the most important part? No. But is it a critical part? Absolutely. Okay, so we need to make sure that we're doing it right, and we take the time to be knowledgeable about it, to be thoughtful about it, to do all of those things. Now, I am an advancement person, a business development person. I tend to jump right into things, okay, get ahead of myself, start doing that stuff. I was that way as a principal too. Something was going on, I ran in and I started to fix it really before I even knew what was going on. Fix it, right? So that's a weakness of mine. Okay? I always like to take time to take a step back, figure out what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it. There we go. Again, we want to say thanks to Fact. There's a prayer that is in this that we already had a wonderful prayer this morning for Tracy, so feel free to borrow this. This is from a wonderful Jesuit, Pat Bergen. So just that's for you guys. Take that back and use it as you see fit. A little gift. Okay. Now, it's critical, right, that we work really hard at what it is that we do, and we do a great job at it, but it's also critical that we know what we're doing. Okay? This is just a little quick thing. Here we go. Even got sound. Everyone see that? You get snow here, you recognize this guy, right? Better?
Yes. Yeah.
Everyone see what's going on there, right? So I'm telling you that this, stole this off of Norwegian TV. But how many times is that us? It's me a lot. It's me a lot. I jump in, and this guy was, think about how hard that guy was working, the job that he was doing. I mean, most of the time when there is snow and ice in DC, I carve out a patch that's about that big in my windshield so that I can just sort of get there, and I realize by the time I get on the highway that I am dramatically unsafe, right? But I gotta get to work, I gotta go. Like, I'm jumping into things. Not that guy. He cleared off the windshields, he did the windshield, he cleaned off his headlights. I mean, he was really into it. He was working really hard. Really hard. And he didn't realize until he got to the end of it that he wasn't doing what he thought he was doing. Right? And that's a critical piece for us. Okay? That's a critical piece that as we work, and as we work hard, and as your teachers work hard at what you're asking them to do, and your business managers work hard at what we're asking them to do, that we're sure we're working together on the right stuff. Okay? So that's a critical piece that we want to make sure that we do. Going backwards. Okay. So to make sure we're doing that today, let's just take a moment and we're going to figure out what it is exactly that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, we're going to talk about the whys and the whats of budgeting, school management. Give ourselves a common language, some things to talk about. Okay, we're going to talk about the actual cost of education. Is anyone familiar with this term, or the true cost of education, the cost per pupil? Okay, great. So we'll be able to have some good conversations about that. Budgeting best practices, using data to make decisions, cash flow analysis. Very exciting. Everyone loves a good cash flow report. Revenue sources, bridging the gap, getting us, what do we do that makes up any kind of a shortfall that we have? Finally, we'll talk a little bit about capitalization and depreciation. Okay, another one of those things that I was going through my education degree. Never thought I was going to be dealing with, but I do. Okay, and we're going to get to all of that. Okay, so first we're going to talk about budgets, right? What is it? Okay, so a budget. I'm supposed to stay over here. I got it. Okay, right, stay focused. I'm from New Jersey, so I do a lot of this. I'm Italian, so I do a lot of this, and I do a lot of moving, so he's going to have to kind of bear with me a little bit. Okay, so a budget, what is it? Okay, it's a policy document, right? Budgets are policy documents, right? What was Joe Biden saying? Don't tell me what your priorities are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your priorities are, right? It's a policy document. It says what you're going to focus on, okay? What you're spending money on is what you're valuing, okay? So if you're, and we'll come back to this a little bit, but if you're telling everyone in your community, right, that you're a STREAM school, you're cutting edge, 21st century, you're doing STREAM, you're doing all this great stuff, and they look at your budget and they realize you have zero money in it for technology, then your words really are meaningless. Okay, it's not going to be, that's not going to ring true to them. Okay, so it's a policy document. Again, it's a financial plan. I think that's pretty basic, right? Everybody understands that. Okay, it's the forecast of the future, what happened in the past. It's a tool to help us make decisions. Is it the only tool? No, clearly not, but it's a pretty important one. It's a pretty important one, okay? We may have the best idea in the world. If we can't pay for it and we can't figure out how to pay for it, right? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Okay? So we can say, this is the best idea in the world. We're going to put money towards it. We're going to figure out how to bridge any gap that we have. That now becomes a great way to engage your community in what it is that you're doing. Okay? So, anyway, it's an operations guide. And again, as I was just sort of talking about, a communications tool. Okay? How many people here share parts of their budget with their communities? Couple show of hands. I think that's good. Not the whole thing, right? Clearly not the whole thing. Not your instructional costs, clearly, what you're paying people. That's not appropriate, okay? But the big line items, the big groupings of things, right? Where you're putting the money, where you're focusing on it, that's an important piece to share with the people in your community. It lets them know what your focus is, right? It invites them to be engaged in what your focus is. And any time that you have an engaged set of stakeholders, that's way better. right? That is way better than having a bunch of stakeholders, parents, grandparents, people in the community, people in the parish say, God, I wonder what they're doing in that school. What is going on, right? That's not good. It might be the best thing since sliced bread. And if they don't know it, that's terrible, right? And if there is something that's amiss, you've got a whole community of people that you can rally their support to help you fix, right? But if we're not engaging them, then that's a missed opportunity. So the budget, it's all of those things, and it's one of those things that helps us to communicate with our stakeholders. Okay, what else? Types of budgets. Most people, when I started, right, when I got my first principalship, I said, I know what a budget is. I know what that is. You got money coming in, you got money going out, and at the bottom, I'm going to make all kinds of money, and I certainly am never ever going to run a deficit. Never do that, and it's great. It's easy. I don't need to do that, okay? What was I wrong? First thing is the operating budget. That's the P&L, right? That's your known expenses. That's the basic one, okay? They all go into that profit and loss statement. It's usually the first budget sheet that you look at. That's the easy one, okay? And when I got my first principalship, walked into the office, I sort of did this tour around my new kingdom, great. And then the secretary came to me and she said, here are the budget documents. And she handed me a stack of papers that was about that thick. And I thought, what is this? I mean, I'm running a K-8 school. I was expecting 2 pages, maybe, right? It had the P&L statement. Then there was a cash flow statement, which I immediately put to the side. Oh, that is, right? I looked at a balance sheet. There was a balance sheet document in it, which I looked at, and I said, yep, they balance, and I put it down. Right, that's great, perfect. And then there were my year-to-date and my monthly reports, okay, that I sort of looked at and didn't know what to make of, and I put those aside too. The only thing I really looked at was that P&L statement. That was easy enough for me to understand, right? The one I should have been paying attention to, the one that's most important, anyone want to take a shot at what that is?
Cash flow.
Cash flow. And who wants to make sure you know what's on that cash flow statement? Who? What?
Us.
The finance committee.
No, not the finance council, us, somebody else is not in this, your employees. Your teachers would really like to know that you know what's on that cash flow statement, because that cash flow statement, that's the one that says if their check's cashed at the end of the month. They would prefer and be very appreciative if you knew that at the end of the month, that number was in the black and not in the red, right? And I paid zero attention to it in my first year as a principal. Zero. It's like, yeah, I'm sure it's fine. Like, yeah, well, I looked at the P&L and it balanced and it was okay. We were a little bit positive to the end of the year. So my cash flow must be okay, right? That was wrong, right? That was wrong. And I didn't pay any attention to it for 3 months. And we didn't have fax at that point or another tuition management system. And in the 4th month, August, September, October, November, right? Going into November, getting ready for Thanksgiving and Christmas, guess who got to make a phone call down to the diocesan office and say, guess what? We're going to be a little short, going to need a little money unless we don't want to not pay our teachers going into Christmas. Not a position I would want anybody to ever be in. After that phone call, that cash flow statement was on my desk every day. Every day. And then my next phone call was to the people from fax, because we have to be able to collect money. Money's got to come in, right? So anyway, all right, back to these definitions, balance sheets. Like I said, I didn't pay any attention to the balance sheet. I looked at it, I was like, yep, assets, liabilities, they balance, it must be right. Well, it is right. It always balances. Whether it's allocated correctly or not, it's always balanced. So anyway, it's a statement of assets and liabilities, the capital of the business, okay? And it details your liabilities to a particular point. It lets you know how balanced you are, okay? And then, of course, the monthly reports. This is the thing, when we talk about data-driven decision-making, these are going to be the ones that you're looking at. This is telling you, you've got the P&L, which you make, so it's January now, so you're either working on your budget for next year now or you're getting ready to, right? In February, you're doing all your work, and you've got a great plan. I'm sure they're all brilliant, okay? But it's a plan made in February that doesn't start until July, and you really don't get into the middle of it until you get into September, October, when the money is or is not coming in, when the expenses are or are not going out, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. So you've got
to actually show up or don't.
Right, whether the kids are showing up or not. Like, I'm going to have 600 kids in my school. Well, if you have 550, oops, that's a pretty significant change, right? It's also a significant change to have 620 if they're all in one grade, which we'll get to that in a little bit. So you've got the plan, your year-to-dates, those are your actuals. That's telling you whether or not you're meeting your plan. Are you on track, below, behind, ahead? It lets you keep track of what it is that you're doing. You have to have all four of them. You have to have all four of them, okay? And if you really get into it, like I did, because I had to make those phone calls, the other one you're going to look for is a general ledger, which really tells you exactly what it is. And the thing that I didn't get that first July, I walked into that office and I closed the door, and I didn't get, at that point, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business, and it was on my shoulders. Pastors are wonderful, they do great work. Your business managers are wonderful, they do great work. But when push comes to shove, you are the principal, you are the head of school for that school. You are in charge of the school, right? You report to the pastor, but you are in charge of that school. And I didn't realize it. And then when I went to the bookkeeper and I said, I need the general ledger, and the bookkeeper says, no, you don't. No one's ever asked for a general ledger before. And I said, I don't care. I don't care. I have to know where the money's going, where it's coming in and where it's going out. I have to know, because when I had to make that phone call, they did not invite my bookkeeper to come down to the diocesan offices and politely explain why they were writing us a check for $20,000. I was the one doing that. And I was sitting in front of the CFO for the Archdiocese, and the superintendent and the associate superintendent, who was sitting behind me going, just breathe, it's going to be okay. I was not breathing, right? They gave me some training, they gave me some of the professional development that I needed at that point, and I got better at it. But when that door closes, you're in charge. You're in charge, and you got to know. And together, all four of those documents make it much, much easier. So if you're not getting those, you have to get those, okay? You have to go to the bookkeepers, you got to say, I need to know what they are. And if you don't know what they are, if you don't know what they mean, once you start looking at those, ask somebody. Ask somebody, okay? Okay. Cash flow. We talked a little bit more about cash flow. We got in that. It's critical. It's sometimes overlooked, right? Most of that is tuition, large fundraisers coming in, parish support for a parish school, for alumni advancement efforts for other ones. Okay, that's the main money in. Main money out is payroll, right? Payroll. Those are the critical things, and then big projects. Big projects. Okay. The other thing I didn't know when I walked in that first July, I was going to become an expert in boilers. It was like the second thing. She handed me those. So the secretary, she handed me this big stack of budgets that I didn't pay any attention to, and they said, "Come on, I want to show you something." I said, "Okay, great." Thinking we're going to look at a classroom, we're going to see like a new computer lab. She opened this door and she's like, "Here's the boiler," and I'm like, "That's great." She goes, "Yeah, well, you might want to pay attention to that." I'm like, "Okay." Boiler, does it work? She goes, "Does for now." Great. It's July, right? It's July. I think she said, "It works for now, but it's more." I think she said that, right? And when I looked at the budget, when I went back, once I got to January, and I looked at the budget, I realized we didn't have a fund to replace this thing that was 30 years old. Oh, right? You can always tell the people, whenever I do this around the country, you can always tell the people that have had boiler problems that realize they don't have any money allocated for it, because they all go, "Ooh." It's a big deal. A roof. Roofs are big deals. Boilers, big deals. New construction like this beautiful building. Those are big deals. Those are things you have to be paying attention to in the cash flow and all those sorts of things. Okay. So again, it's important you understand the flow of it. And we're going to get into this a little bit more, because the flow, the ebb and flow of money coming in and money going out. Again, like I said, at first, I thought, well, if the revenues exceed the expenditures on that P&L, I must be good. I clearly wasn't, okay? So knowing the ebb and flows of the cash flow in and out, that's an important thing, okay? And the big things, Christmas, and then the summer. And one of the other things that we will touch on later on, okay? How many people have fees that you collect in the spring for next year's stuff when they ready? You got registration fees, got new student things, blah, 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 blah. That's not money for the spring.
Not a slush fund.
Not a slush fund. And we will be talking about this a lot. And you know, there are people who I know have been burned by it, and there are people who don't know why we make a big deal out of it. It becomes a big deal. That money is for a service you have not yet provided, and you really can't use it. Okay? So it does not get into that cash flow. My cash flow is fine. I've got all my fees. I'm all set. I'm all ready to go. Once you start using next year's money to pay this year's bills, you are on a very slippery slope. Okay? So we will talk about that more. And again, the monthly reports are extremely important to be looking at to let you know whether or not you are on or off track. Okay, there you go.
That slippery slope in West Virginia was deadly. It committed a lot of principals to wonder why they were even in the job, because I said you can't spend that money. We spent that money there for 30 years. How long you've been here? 30 years. Interesting. Not a good philosophy. There's two things I want to bring up that Matt spoke to that from a principal or a superintendent's position I think needs to be clarified and hammered home. Number one, he brought up that the budget is a policy document, a financial plan, operations guide, and a communications tool. Yes, yes, and yes. However, I don't think that the communications tool piece gets talked about enough. Because quite simply, the job of a principal in a local school is that of communicator, chief communication officer. There's no doubt about it. If you need to replace your boiler in a moment's notice because you haven't planned for it, if you have an issue with a teacher that needs to be addressed, proper communication, effective communication, clear communication is critical. All the things we're going to talk about today with finances and all the things we're talking about with budgeting and so forth are critical for operation of a great school. Critical. Because you do it well, that's going to reflect in how you're able to communicate with your staff and how you communicate with your constituency groups. And dare I say, you need to do it. Because so many schools work in just the black hole of, yeah, that's my school where I send a check every month. And there's no real, I guess, benefit of seeing that it's a well-run deal. They'll come back next year or they won't. You may not even know why they come back or they don't. The better your communication, the more you can track that, the more you can improve that, the more consistency you can have in that area. So all the things we talk about today, having been a principal and having been a superintendent, my number one job every single day is to make good decisions and then to get those decisions out clearly to the people that they affect. So if you have a great budget, that shouldn't be something you keep between you and the business officer and the principal and the pastor, quietly in corners. You should talk about it. Now, as Matt said, you should tell them every single line item, every single detail. It's not important for that. But where you stand, what you look like, what your future looks like, what the future planning of the school should look like is critically important to your growth and to your sustainability. So I would recommend and beg you to please, please, please use this communication tool line on that PowerPoint as a call to arms. Please make sure you do it. The other thing that Matt spoke about, and we completely are in lockstep on this, but I just want to hammer it home again. Who here is a principal? Some business people, I think, business officers, but most principals. How many principals are principals of a school in which you worked as a teacher? Okay. How many people are principals who were teachers? Let's go that direction. All of you, right? Exactly. The reason you're a principal is because somebody saw you at the central office and said, he or she is a fantastic, great teacher, and we need principals. We should talk to them and see if they want to join our ranks. Or they were a really good history teacher, or they really run a great show in that second grade, or whatever the case may be, wherever you taught. As Matt said, how many people got up in graduation from college and said, I'm going to run a $1.2 million corporation? Nobody. Everybody said I was going to teach nouns and verbs to second graders, right? I was going to teach the capital of Vermont is Montpelier, right? That's what we did, that's what we set out to do, is impart knowledge to kids, not to run a business. But tell me if this sounds familiar to you as a Catholic school principal. You help write curriculum, yes? Okay. You sometimes put Band-Aids on knees that are skinned at recess. How many people have ever been on a roof and had to look at the problem that was up there, whether it be a vent or a hole? Okay. Cut grass when the guy didn't show up and you got a soccer game the night. Worked in the lunchroom. I could go on and on and on. The principal's job is much more than teaching mountain birds. Oh yeah, by the way, there's budgets. Oh yeah, by the way, there's human resource issues. There's legal things you have to deal with. There's contracts you have to negotiate. Again, we were 7th grade history teachers. We weren't that guy. We weren't that gal. But now, you suddenly get a chair in a really fancy office, and you're all those things all the time, every day. And you never have a plan for what happens every day because it just comes at you. That's scary as hell. It really is. And dare I say, we're not probably trained for it. And therefore, some of our schools suffer because of it. We have to learn on the fly, as Matt did, as I did, as we probably have all had to do. So that's the critical piece that makes these kind of displays and these kind of presentations important, because at least we can give you some areas to start looking at so you're not in the dark all the time. Some of you here have been 20 years, you'll hear things you've never heard before. Some of you have been here 20 days, and you'll hear things you've never heard before. So, Matt has up here on this cell, and I can't disagree with this one iota. In fact, I profess this often. If we don't know why we're here, there's no other question we need to ask other than that. Why are we here? And the beauty of this, the beauty of our jobs is the why is established. The why is super established. The reason most companies fail in the marketplace is because their mission is not clear. Nike in 1974 started as a startup shoe company distributing shoes made in Japan, and they were like for runners. You couldn't sell a football shoe with Nike on the side of it. You couldn't sell a soccer shoe with Nike on the side. Nobody knew what it was. And they were a limited brand. And Adidas was running the show, and Converse was running the show. And they didn't, once Nike got into a clear notion of what their mission was, that every single person, not just the pro athletes, every single person is an athlete, and that's what they started promoting, they sold shoes out to everybody in every industry and every possible marketplace. In fact, Nike is now known more as a marketing company than a shoe company because of how good it is at marketing. Most restaurants, they always say restaurants are the hardest business in the world to start up because they lose their way. They want to be a chicken shop, and before you know it, they're selling burgers too. And then they have nachos on the list, and then they have, and then they have, and they have. Before you know it, what they set out to do in the first place is lost. They don't have a mission. Our mission is perfectly established. We know what it is, and it's probably the soundest, most recognized mission in the history of the world. 2,000 years in the making. It's so simple. We just have to communicate it well. We know why. But if we don't think that way on a daily basis, if we don't say it often, we're going to be in trouble. If we get tied up with, I got to cut the grass, and I got to work in the lunchroom, and I've got to worry about the budgets and all these things, we don't have the why we're doing it, you're going to be short-lived in that chair. You're not going to have a great experience, and you might want to end up going back to the classroom or work at 7-Eleven somewhere.
Just a question, has anyone seen this TED Talk? Simon's TED Talk on this, the golden circle is great.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, then I go back once in a while and watch it just to remind myself. It is great.
This is what I was speaking of. Catholic school principals are not financial experts. Nobody expects you to be. You have to be competent, but we can't expect you on the front end to automatically be that just because you got the job. You're great educators. If you recognize that you can grow into the position, you come to this today and you listen, you come to this today, take notes and ask good questions and get something out of it, and then go back to your superintendent or go back to whoever you need to go back to, your business manager, and start asking the good questions as Matt did when he learned what part of the documents he received were significant for his success, then it's going to be a great experience for you. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. Nobody expects you to immediately come in from this to this and make that jump. That's not what we're looking for. You are responsible, and I'm just guessing, being a superintendent, I think I probably have a pretty good grasp. You're responsible for a small corporation that's between $700,000 and probably $1.2 to $1.5 million in yearly revenues. That's a big gig. That's a big, big gig. And that's not what you signed up for when you became an educator. But it is what you signed up for when you took the role of principal. We're all in the education business, but not everybody understands the business of education. I get t-shirts made with that. It's a really important distinction. Okay? So please pay attention to the things we're talking about, because I think it'll give you great opportunities to grow. And this is really the bottom line at the end of the day. I look at this school and I'm thinking, wow, this is fantastic. What a beautiful place. What a beautiful space. It's all new, beautiful bricks and mortar. The roof looked like it was solid. Gotta love that. You know, the grass was cut.
I bet the boiler is perfect.
I bet you they don't have a boiler. They probably have an HVAC. Ooh. My point is, 650 kids. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's great. As we drove in today, past the houses, clearly this is an up and coming part of the world. It's going to be here a long time. If you take that for granted, the school won't be, although the neighborhood might be. You can't take it for granted. You have to be aware of the challenges, because you are, and we throw this word around a lot in Catholic education and in the Catholic faith, stewards. We talk about stewardship all the time. If you don't recognize that that is exactly what you are, you're a steward of the resources you've been given as a principal, or as a business manager, or even as a pastor. There's a chance that decisions you make today, even though you might even be gone by the time they come to fruition, will end up not allowing that school or parish to continue. It's that significant. When you talk about the size of an industry like education in a local school, it's not something, schools can close overnight. I've seen it happen. But more often than not, schools close because of things missed, opportunities missed, bad decisions made. Oh, we don't have to do boiler maintenance. That's an extra $3 grand in this year's budget's a brand new system. Next year, probably the same thing is going to be said. After that, you need those 2 years, why do we worry about it now? Before you know it, instead of a $3,000 maintenance bill, you've got a $45,000 boiler repair bill. Hey, I'm picking on boilers. We shouldn't be picking on boilers. The Boilermaker community is going to be all over us.
It's
not good.
That's right. You know, the one thing I will say about that picture it scares me, right? Because you think about our major jobs as leaders, right? We're instructional leaders, we're spiritual leaders, we're also operational leaders, okay? And the work that we do as a spiritual leader, while critical, if we don't have great prayers, if we don't have clear Catholic identity, it will affect the enrollment of the school, it will affect the mission, but the kids that are here today will be here tomorrow. Okay? The same thing from a curricular standpoint. It's going to take a while for people to realize that your math program might be subpar. I don't know that it is, but just as an example. It's going to take people a while to say, wait, those test scores really aren't great. No, they're not getting into good high schools. No, those high schools aren't putting kids into great colleges. That takes a while. That call I made to the diocesan finance office, that could have been catastrophic in a week, right? So that's why these, and because we're not prepared for them, we like to say like, well, I'll deal with that later. Well, there's a finance council meeting coming up. I think it's in 6 weeks. We'll deal with it then. I'll look at it then. Sometimes you can't wait. That's why you gotta have it. That's why you have to have your mind around it, because that could be the reality, right? That we want to avoid. Okay. Sorry.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And if this maybe a deaf ears at this particular parish, because again, it's so beautiful and clearly there's lots of people supporting it and lots of the community around it would support it. But I dare say Des Moines isn't all St. Francis of Assisi's. Okay, is it fair to say?
Or even just the city of Des Moines.
So it's great to be here, but I don't want to have you think that I'm looking at everything through the rose-colored glasses of St. Francis. It is a beautiful place, by the way, I love it. But I've been in parishes that are 84 kids, and their walls aren't so pretty, and the roofs aren't so stable. And again, picking on the boilers aren't so hot. No pun intended. My point is, we have to be aware of what makes our schools tick, why we're there, and how we can support it to the best of our ability. And this Budget Philosophy 101 is one that Matt and I, we've done this now, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times, how many times we've done this project. But every time we come back to this budget philosophy, and I think it's really critical, especially in a school that's in the middle of the road. And that is, start with what you have versus what you want. Everybody wants an in-ground swimming pool for their PE class. Not everybody can have an in-ground swimming pool for their PE class, right? You have to realize that we don't get federal funding to a large degree. We don't have the ability to, secure unlimited revenue streams for our schools. So you must be very clear about what you can have versus what you can't want. And the other thing that's dangerous is you're going to have some parents, maybe even a collection of parents, and maybe even they're the really, really importantly rich parents. or the influential parents, or the parents who've been there for the third generation, or whatever, saying, if we don't do this, we're gonna close. Everybody knows we need to have more fill in the blank, biology labs, language offerings, whatever. And as a principal, maybe even a newer principal, yeah, okay, well, I gotta work on that. If that's not a realistic thing that you know in your heart you must have, don't make that error. Don't jump down that path, it's too scary. Okay? Please realize what you have to have versus what you want to have. All right? Other considerations, I gotta flip the screen. Other considerations for school finance. Are you a single school or a multiple school? What's your experience with those finances? I don't know how the Diocese of Des Moines is laid out if there's campuses that have multiple buildings. But that presents a unique challenge. If you've got a middle school and a high school, or a middle school and elementary school that is still Saint whoever, but they have two different campuses or two different staffs, is there ways, and we'll talk about it, is there a way, bless you, that we can share resources, share teachers, share facilities, share. We've already talked to you about being a stewardship, or steward rather, and the responsibility of stewardship and accountability. We've already talked about the business side of running a school. That's pretty important. But here's probably the most important thing on this entire slide is the last one. It talks about the financial nuances between high schools and elementary. As we talk later in the presentation about development, and that development is real critical when we talk about the gap between what people bring in tuition and what you spend in costs, okay? When we talk about that gap, we're going to talk about advancement and development and trying to get new dollars and real dollars from outside sources, third party. We always talk about that. It's real easy to say. And I know as superintendent, I reviewed a bunch of budgets where the gap between what's coming in from tuition and fees is $300,000 less than what they're going to spend on costs and expenses. And then naturally, the Catholic schools, they balance. How is that? I don't understand. Well, that's a development project. Really? Interesting. Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. How much did development bring in last year? $13,000. Interesting. What are you going to put in the cupcakes to sell that's going to get you to $300,000? This isn't Colorado, right? It doesn't work like that, right? So you suddenly have a development project, a development issue of a $300,000 gap that's just, oh, that's development. Well, if it's not really possible, then your budget really isn't balanced. We all say, superintendent say, submit a balanced budget. But the question maybe should have been, can you please submit an appropriate and real budget, not filled with lies? Because we know that that's the case. But the reason I say that is because this line here brings up a tremendous difference between elementary and high schools. Everybody loves their high school, for the most part. Everybody remembers football games on Friday night and the first kiss after prom and blah, 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 all these wonderful things, wearing their jacket, with the big button. Everybody loves that. I know people that can't remember their grade school, much less write a check to them. Okay? Everybody remembers the coach that saved their life and turned them around, and the principal that really reached out to them when they were in trouble, or came to them and they wrecked their car on the way to school on an icy day, and how he was a wonderful person, or she was a great lady that pulled me out and got me to school on time. All these wonderful warm feelings that equate to dollars at the end of the day when you do advancement. Elementary schools don't have that pull. So if you have a development issue brewing, that you've got this tremendous gap you need to fill in your elementary school, you better figure out a way to do it rather than alumni. High schools can rely on that. Grade schools can't. So when we say we have the development discussion, it is not a universal discussion, because high schools automatically have an incredible leg up. Granted, they probably have more people. Granted, they probably have in this campus today, and they probably have had more graduates over the course of time. They also keep way better records of their graduates and where they attend and what they do. Colleges have a leg up on high schools. High schools have a tremendous leg up on elementary schools. And development dollars have to flow that way. You have to realize that. So don't think that they're equal. Because if you're in an elementary school and you say, that's a development issue, we can pop that out, we'll call some. Your development dollars for kids in your school are coming from grandparents, not from graduates. Okay? So just be aware of that. Okay? And I think I'm back to you.
Yeah. Well, I just want to take a couple minutes here. How are we doing so far? Is this ringing true? Is this all stuff we've heard? Are we well into this? Right? Any big major questions?
Didn't call one lie yet.
Not one.
Yes.
Love it. Okay, so I just want you guys to just turn, let's just take 2 or 3 minutes, okay? And I just want you to sort of be thinking about your school as it is right now. Is it stable? Why or why not, right? Okay, is it challenged? Do I not know? Okay, have that conversation, and then in terms of financial management, where you're most concerned. That's a critical piece, right? Because it's really easy. You know, when we talk about people who want to talk about the budgets, 99% of those, maybe 95% of those people, if you look at their budget, it's a great budget, right? Budget balances, the cash flow's good, balance sheet is in order, right? It's all fine. They set the plan, they meet the plan, it's great. They're like, oh, you want to look at my stuff? And then there are the people in the back. That's where I was. Like, and what do you have, sir? Oh, you don't want to see mine, right? Because mine was a mess at the beginning. Mine was a mess. And the thing that I had to do to get it out of being a mess at the beginning was to say to them, like, I don't know this. I don't know how to fix this, okay? And then that got me on the path to being able to fix it, right? So let's just take 2 or 3 minutes. Let's hit a couple of these, and then we'll come back, have a little quick talk about these things, and then we'll move on. So what kind of came out in the talks as we were talking about it? So what were the things that sort of are driving stability in your schools? What came out of the tables? What's driving stability, Father?
I would say one of our things is just enrollment stability. Our enrollments, depending on the year, it goes up or down.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily know who's going to be there next year.
Sure, right, having that's a critical piece. Anything else? Stability? Yeah, Father.
One of the things we've kind of had is being in a rural community. I'm in a town that's south and west of here, and it's relatively small comparative, but you can't just keep charging tuition, because if we charge tuition what it actually costs, there is absolutely no way our students can afford it. So you got to find other ways to doing that. We're blessed to have a thrift store that supports our school, and that supports a significant portion of our budget.
Well, that's interesting. Another outside forms of revenue. That's
Right.
great. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But diversifying those revenue streams, that's an important piece. What about challenges? What are some of the big things that we're facing? So, Father, I assume the opposite side of your coin, right? So having a volatile enrollment, that's always troubling, right? If your budget's 500 and you're like, I don't know, could be 550, could be 450, that's trouble, right? That's a challenge to budget around. Anything else in terms of? Yes, ma'am.
Well, trying to keep up to pay our faculty and staff just wages so that we don't have turnaround every year because
Yep.
they're off to the public schools, so they get paid
Yeah.
more.
Yep.
So
That's a great point.
For most of us, that's a huge amount of our budget. You know?
Yeah, absolutely, as it should be. And not only is that's a huge financial management issue, it's also a social justice issue, right? We're asking these people to dedicate their lives and to be part of our mission and our ministry. Like we have some responsibility to make sure that they are as justly compensated as they can be, right? So that absolutely is a great point, and always and perennially a huge area of challenge. Other big, yeah.
So one of the other challenges is that, our schools are operating, there are not really what I would call true advancement programs in the majority of the elementary schools. So our schools are dependent on, parish funding to sort of get to that balanced budget, somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 40 to 70% of tithing coming over to support the school. So there are some significant issues that, depending on how many, right, depending on how many people are sitting in the pews on Sunday and what tithing is looking like, and in all honesty, sometimes a change of assignment of pastors can have some significant implications on school
Let me jump in
operations.
on that. Let me jump in that, because this is a really critical piece. Iowa is an incredibly Catholic state. I get that. I've heard that. I've researched it. I know that. The fact that you have such a reliance on the Sunday pledge, it's great that they support that, and it's great that the people say, this is where I want my dollar to go, and clearly they must, because they're given the money, right? They wouldn't give it if they didn't want it to go there. That's great. The pastor issue is critical. But this is why the communication that we spoke about in the first cells is so important. Because if you're just making an assumption that the money's going to keep coming, and let's be honest, and I'm not saying this with love in my heart, with love in my heart, I call them blue hairs. My mother is a blue hair, right? Love in my heart. I'm not picking on them. God love them, because they're the ones that are picking up the freight for most of these schools, because we know our parents aren't necessarily showing up every Sunday as much as we would like, right, pastors? I'm speaking of the choir literally here, right? My point is, they don't even have kids in the school because they're older. They might not even have grandkids in the school. They might have aged out, yet they're still showing up every Sunday. That market's getting thinner and thinner every single day, we know, obviously. The critical piece to this is, if you want them to continue, and maybe even after they're gone, have one last big gift, you better communicate all the awesome, cool, great stuff you're doing tied to the mission of the church. Because that's what they're buying into, is the mission of the church and prolonging the church, not necessarily the fact that you all need a science lab. So you must communicate that mission that we talked about very early on. You must communicate that and use all of the resources, your budget, your kids, all that as a communication tool to say thank you, and to say, and we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep going because you support us. Those are the critical things in that.
Great, and that's a huge area of financial concern too. Good stuff. Okay, moving on.
That's me.
Did you?
That number you say, 46 to 70%, almost made my knees buckle. It's not good. But if it's your model that has worked, I'm not going to throw a rock at it. It just, if I said I'm going to drop that same model into a state that doesn't have the great Catholic support of such long generations of people attending, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't.
Well, I think that there are a lot of pastors that are questioning whether it's working, which is why Meitler is arriving at the end of the month.
Gotcha. Actual cost of education. This is a phrase or a hyper, not a topic, what is it? Definition, an explanation. It's not because I used to play a lot of tennis. The reason we chose ACE is because it makes sense. The actual cost of education is a critical definition everyone must know. It's going to scare you when I tell you what it is, and it's going to scare you because you're going to say, well, we don't get that intuition. But this is the basis for everything we're going to talk about moving forward, okay? The actual cost of education, quite simply, is the budget expenses, total. You can do this with two numbers off your budget line. The total amount of expenses divided by the number of students. You will get a number. It's probably going to be around 7, 8 grand, maybe more depending on what you offer in the school. It's going to be that. How many people here charge exactly what it costs to go to the school? Okay? The derision in the comments and the laughter from this side of them scares me to death. But it's true. We know that, correct? Because we're the Catholic school Pizza Hut model. Regular price for the first one, $4, $4, $4, $4, $4 for every kid thereafter. Remember that old Pizza Hut ad? It's a fact. How many times have you walked into the finest steak restaurant in town and said, I would like a prime rib for myself, and I'm going to give you $35 for it, because that's what it costs. My wife, she would like the tomahawk. We'll give you $17.50. And of course, Mickey, Billy, and the twins, they would all like a really nice hamburger, and we would just appreciate that on the house. Of course not. They throw you out, you don't get to eat there, right? Doesn't work like that. No business runs like that. But that's the Catholic model we've been working on for years. Again, I say this with love in my heart, so you know something bad's coming. I have 3 aunts who are nuns. I mentioned this to them. They looked very nasty at me and said, oh, I guess I get it. We need to change the paradigm, because when I say what I'm going to say now, you're going to say, oh, blasphemous. Please turn the video on. And again, I say this with love in my heart. The nuns are dead. We need to move on. This isn't 1953 anymore. We can't operate schools on the premise that we're going to get free labor because they're nuns. When the nuns are tight on money, they're going to make a phone call to the local beer distributor and say, hey, we're a little short this month. Can you give me $17.50? And it shows up magically on Friday by payroll. And that, you know, when the roof has a hole in it, we can just call that plumber guy whose 3 kids have gone here, and he'll show up with 2 of his contractor friends who know something about roofs, and it'll all be great by Monday. It doesn't work like that. The nuns are gone. God love the nuns. We wouldn't be here without them. But it doesn't work like that anymore. Okay? We have to be realistic. We have to be smart about the business of education. So this ACE number is a critical thing. You're going to do it when you get home today. Look at your budget number. Look at what that expense is. Divided by the number of students, you'll probably get a number somewhere between 5 and 8. I usually say $7,000, $7,200 is a is a general American number for American Catholic schools, and nobody charges it. You can increase tuition and you can increase fees, but only to a point, because every time you raise $1 at a certain point, you push a kid out, right? Here's the paradigm shift that I would suggest to you, and I think it makes real great sense. But again, take it with a grain of salt. Nobody's going to flip the switch and do it automatically. Harvard University. Everybody knows Harvard. Everybody likes Harvard. Everybody like to go to Harvard. It's a great place. By the way, Harvard is over 150 years old. Nobody's claiming that it's got old buildings, by the way. Just mentioning that to you. Look, you need a new school. This is old. This one's 75 years old. Harvard's 150. They're dying to get in. Shut up. Now, back to my point about what Harvard charges. It's about $75,000 a year all in to go to Harvard. That's a lot of money. Very few people pay $75,000 all in to go to Harvard. Doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs might be able to pay close to it. Bill Gates' kid might pay all of it. But my kid's not going to pay that. And that's not going to be able to happen. So they do some type of sliding scale based on some type of financial review that allows them to say, you're smart enough to get here, we need you to get here, we have the endowment that's going to allow you to come here, because instead of 75, I need 15,000 from you for the year. And you'd be like, I'm at Harvard for 15, sold. It's cheaper than Iowa, I'm all in. Right? And then they say to you, you're inner city and you really don't have anything going for you financially, but you're brilliant, you can come for free. And you are Bill Gates' son, sorry, we get 75 and we're going to hit your daddy up for the gift. Okay? And that's how Harvard does it. And dare I say that's how Iowa does it. And dare I say that's how probably the community college does it. Because they know education has costs that are fixed, and there's only so much they can give, but they need kids, so they'll give what they can to get that kid. I don't say that we suddenly go to the Harvard model and charge actual costs, because you will scare people right off the bridge. They're not going to come back. But here's what I would suggest you do. Figure out what your ACE is, and back to my previous statement, communicate the bejesus out of it. Do you realize that it costs $7,200 to go here? Do you realize we're only charging you $3? Do you realize we're a hell of a bargain? And you need to support this place so it can continue to offer this quality of education to everybody that wants to come here at a rate they can afford. Oh, by the way, here's an envelope. Remember, it's at Christmas. You need to broadcast what your dollar amount is, actual cost, to everyone you meet. Because they're going to realize that Catholic education in Des Moines, Iowa is the bargain of the century. They're going to realize that they get more for their dollar here than they do when they go anywhere else. Up to and including the public schools, because we also have Jesus on our side. And that's a pretty good teammate, right? So the fact of the matter is, if you can tell them that it costs $72, we're only charging you $3, you've got a heck of a leverage point with them when they come to you and say, well, I don't think I can afford to go here anymore. Are you kidding me? Now, I would also ask you, given the 70 number you gave me, which scares me to death, start working towards a more equitable dollar amount of tuition closer to that ACE number, realizing that ACE will go up all the time. But also realize this. It's not in ourselves, but it's a critical thing, I think, for you to remember. We talk all the time. You said your biggest challenge is enrollment. And if I asked the principal, just random at a bar some night, say, hey, what's your biggest challenge? They'd probably say enrollment. I said, what are you going to do about that? We're going to get more kids. How? How? I teach a class for Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, and one of my students is from Ketchikan, Alaska. They have 84 students, and they just got 3 more students after Christmas. And I said, how'd you do that? They came to us from the public school. I said, did you recruit them? They said, no. I said, well, how'd you get them? I said, we knew them. How? There's only 84 kids. You know, we know every Catholic person in Ketchikan. When we realized they had a problem, we merely called them up and said, come on over. We got a spot for you. We didn't recruit them. We just called them. There's only so many Catholics in Ketchikan, Alaska. That's an easy do. You can't do that in Des Moines. You can't. So what I'm suggesting to you, quite simply, is start pushing that number towards the ACE, but have very, very pointed and directed recruitment. All Catholic kids should go to Catholic schools is true. Some Catholic kids are more valuable than others. What? That's blasphemous again. I've already picked on old people, I've already picked on nuns, now I'm picking on Catholics. Wow, this is not a good talk for me. But the fact of the matter is, a second grader is more valuable to your school than a seventh grader. They just are. So you need to look at what the magic number, my word, magic number is in your school, in every class. I will make an assumption that you have a class size mandate of no more than 24. You got to call the superintendent, get approval. Of course, she'll always give it to you because you want all the kids. But the fact of the matter is, you've got a 24 magic number, or a 24 number in your classroom as to what you can have. If you have 21 in that class, you have a magic number of 3. Realize what your magic numbers are for all your classes, and then very pointedly recruit those kids. The blanket statement, we're going to do a lot of recruiting and get a lot of kids, is a fallacy, because you're not going to get them because you don't have any direction. That's like saying we're gonna market our product on the side of the road and hope people show up. Doesn't work. Find out where the 4th graders are and go get them. Find out where the 2nd graders are, you need to go get them. The problem is, you don't want 26. You only want 24, because when you get to 26, she might say no, and now you got to buy a teacher. Your equation went in the toilet. It went the wrong way. So very pointed recruitment. And why is that magic number of 3 important? Because every dollar you get from those 3 costs you $0. You've already got the lights on. You've already got the heat and the boiler, again, boiler talk, working. You've already got the books, probably, because everybody buys enough books for the year. That's an empty seat. It doesn't cost you anything to fill it. And every dollar you get from it is money in your pocket and toward the bottom line. And brings that ACE number down because the coefficient now has changed. Instead of 500 kids, it's 502. So that ACE number goes down. That's the critical information I have for you about ACE. It is very fluid based on the number of kids you have. And the more kids you have, the better that ACE number is. And that number gets closer to what they're charging. So your takeaways from this part of the talk is, figure out what your ACE is, broadcast it from every billboard you can, put it on the invoice that you charge when you get their monthly check-in. Fax can put it on there, I'm sure they can do it. If not, we'll talk to them. Tell them what it actually costs. Every kid in the family, there's 3 kids, that's $7,200 3 times. Even though they're only paying $4,000 and then half of that and then half of that. They're still getting a $21,000 gift from the school. And push that number, push that number, push that number. That's a takeaway. Look to get your tuition and fees to be closer to what the ACE number is. Again, you can't make like 20% jumps overnight, I get that. But have a plan to, over the course of 5 years, work towards a better alignment with that number. Perhaps think about charging tuition accordingly in the sliding Harvard scale, as we talked about. And think about how you're directly marketing to your potential students to get the students you really want and really need. Okay, any questions about all that? I dumped a ton of stuff on that selfie. Any questions about that? And probably the most important thing is, Harvard's old too, and we're not going to replace it. Okay, good. No gym. No new gym. All right. You need to align your tuition with expenditures. This is critical to the cost of education piece, actual cost of education. You shouldn't say, we want a glossy new gym because our old gym needs new paint. My mom used to say, you always get a new car every time the ashtray's dirty. Mom, I don't smoke. It's a figure of speech, but stop buying cars. You need to make sure what you're buying for your school is appropriate to your goals. If you are hiring a teacher based on a fundraising objective, if we have a really good candy sale, we can afford a biology teacher. If I was a biology teacher, I'd run like a... That's not how I want to be paid. Okay? If you're relying on bake sales, car washes, and candy sales for the operation of your school, you're on life support. You're on life support. You have to have a much deeper budget that has real numbers coming from real sources. Again, this isn't Colorado. You can't put that in the cupcakes. Okay? If you have a school, this is directed to you, that says, we're doing fine on our budget, we don't need to raise tuition this year, we're going to freeze for a year or 2 or 10, please take that person out and beat them. It is absolutely, you have to raise it something just to stay current. Because if you only raise it 1% and the cost of living is up to 3%, you lost money. You're paying teachers more. I guarantee you electric's not going down. Heating and cooling costs, operation costs are not going down. If you don't at least make it consistent with the cost of living that's going up, you're losing money. How many businesses can say we're going to lose money every year for the next 3 years and say, hey, this is okay with us? Short of Amazon, it isn't working for nobody. You can't do it like that. Even if it's a nominal increase. I would hope it would be an actual increase based on costs. But if you really think, oh, we're swimming, we got enough, we're in the black, $500,000, raise it a nickel. We're in the black, $25, raise it a little bit more. You can't make that assumption, because when we get to cash flow, Matt has a great story about how he looked at his cash flow and said, "Oh, we all go to Florida. We got a bunch in the bank." Certain times of the year that's going to happen, but other times of the year that number disappears. Okay, so don't count on having that money in the bank just because it's there today. People hate this line. Hate it. If we negotiate for tuition, there's some people, I mean, they paid up front. We're suddenly going to give the same product to another family for less? That's where communication is so critical. I use this example all the time. If I said to you, I need you all to go to Paris with me, let's buy a plane ticket 21 days out, the cost of that ticket is $1,500. If I call you 14 days before the trip to Paris and said, hey, can you invite your brother? Sure, he'll come too. It's $2,500. I said, hey, by the way, a buddy of mine needs a date. Can your sister come? Sure. It's $3,500 because you're only 7 days out. You walk up to the gate to buy the ticket for the noon flight to Paris, and you walk up to the gate at 11:45 and say, I got to get to Paris. I'm dying for a croissant. How much is it going to cost me? They say $5,000. Every time you get closer to the need, the price goes up. Plane takes off. Somebody runs up behind me and says, I need a croissant too. How much is the ticket? Can't go. How much is the value of that seat that's open? Zero. Because you can't utilize it. Every seat on the plane must be filled, whatever necessary means you could have to put to it to make it happen. If you're going to lose a family, if you're going to lose a second grader because they just can't afford that tuition increase of $300, or 36, let's make it easy because I'm not so good at math. You're going to raise the tuition to $360 this year. $360. Okay? Divided by 9, that's what, $40 a month, right? Give or take? They can't afford it. That's $10 a week. That's a pizza they're not going to eat. Okay, fine, they can't afford it. So because they can't afford the $360, they're going to leave a second grader? So you lose your tuition, bless you. You lose your tuition this year. But you also lose your tuition next year. And you also lose your tuition 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Oh, by the way, they have a younger sister. Damn. $360 costs you all kinds of tuition dollars. Call a friend. Get what you got to get. Because I don't want you to give it away. I've already said that. I said raise tuition. But to those that are truly in need, it's the Catholic thing to do to help them, number one. It's part of our mission, number two. And from a purely empirical business perspective, it's going to cost you more to get a new kid than it's going to be to save that kid. Okay? And when the wealthy parent comes to you and says, wait a minute, I just heard a terrible rumor. You're giving away the tuition. So-and-so got it for free. First of all, you say, well, we don't discuss that. HIPAA. Call that out. Nobody cares. But more importantly than that, you say, isn't our mission to teach Catholic education, spread and evangelize all students? Well, yeah. Your kids coming here, right? Well, yeah. They're getting a great education, right? Yeah. Sorry. That's what we had to do to help a kid. And if they say, well, I don't want you to help any more kids, then he needs to go. He needs to go. And you could even use the parable of the graveyard, or the vineyard. You know, they hired a guy for $10 a day at 8 o'clock. They hired another guy because they needed more people at noon for $10. They hired a guy at 10 minutes to closing for $10. And the guy said, wait a minute, I'm getting screwed here. I worked all day for the same amount of money. He said, did you agree to it? Yeah, and then shut up. That's not really the way the parable was written, but you get my point. You get my point, right? You get my point. If that's what we agreed to, then you can't renegotiate. How many baseball players ever gave back money on their salary because they got hurt? 0. How many people held out because they had a better year than expected? A lot. I think that's bad business. Okay? On here it says, half tuition is better than an empty desk. If you're gonna lose a kid over $360 increase, again, 9 months, 360, I can do the math. If you're gonna lose a kid over that, that's not good business. That's just not good business. Okay. Is that my last song?
Okay, so just kind of walking through this, and again, with this, you know, it's not just, well, okay, yeah, you can have it. You know, there are a lot of products out there. Fax is a good one. There's some other groups that have good ones where you can verify what those needs are. All of this stuff that you're talking about, that we're talking about here, the difference between what you charge and what your actual cost is, whether you say it or not, you're giving out financial aid. So you should communicate, right? You can't say, well, the budget doesn't balance. We have no money for financial aid. If you're not collecting the real cost of education, you're already giving them financial aid. You may not have enough, but you're already giving it to them. So that's one of the things that we talk about, using the budget numbers as a communications piece, right? If you're not saying that, look, our costs are 9, we charge you 7, that means right off the bat, everybody gets $2,000. Everybody gets $2,000. That's a pretty good deal, right?
The funny thing is, we give that same deal to non-Catholics.
Yep.
So I don't know about Iowa, but I know in our diocese, non-Catholic don't pay ACE either.
Yep.
So even the non-Catholics, and I love non-Catholics, I have no problem with non-Catholics. But the fact that you're knocking them, I've already knocked nuns, I've already knocked old people, I've already knocked poor people. I'm not knocking the non-Catholics, but the fact of the matter is, even the people who don't come to church, and we know they're not going to put anything in the basket, are getting a deal. That's how much we love our educational product. That's how much we believe in it.
Yep.
That's a sellable point. That's a sellable point.
Yeah, and you know, and at that point, you know, sort of the old Reaganism, right? You trust but verify. Okay, how many times have we had somebody, it's happened to me all the time, Mr. Russell, I'm sorry, we are not going to be able to make that tuition payment this month. I need you to cut me a break. I need you to spread the payment out. I need you to forgive this and that and the other thing. Okay, I understand, things are tough. That's great. Thanks a lot. Good meeting. And they go off and you see them go into the parking lot, they get into a new car and they drive away. Are you kidding? When we talk to parents about when we're collecting tuition, you need to know where you are on their priority scale, right? We should not be first. I think everyone agrees with that. We shouldn't be first. Food, housing, clothing, taking care of the kids, all that stuff should be above us. But where are we?
We're above Disney World.
We got to be above Disney World. I don't want to be 11th in terms of when I'm collecting money. I'd like to be 4th. I can live with being 7th. I get below 10 and all of a sudden we're buying new cars and we're taking trips, which is all great, but then don't come in and tell me you can't afford this and I've got to be taking money out of my tuition assistance pot so that you guys can, so that they can do that, right? So that's why we need to trust but verify what the people are saying with a financial aid disclosure. Everybody should fill it out. From my perspective, everybody in your school should fill out a grant and aid application before they get $1.
That's a shock.
$1. You don't get anything. You want $1? Fill this form out. That's great. Okay.
That's shocking to a lot of people because they don't want their quote information out there. I hear that a lot, and a lot of the wealthy families will say, "Well, we don't need it." Great. Then you're not going to get. Then you're not going to get the everybody gets a discount.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we want to take these resources, and Dr. Schmidt was saying earlier, we are stewards of these resources, right? They're not ours. So we're stewards of these resources that are entrusted to us. So if we're going to be giving out discounts, and we're going to be giving out breaks on things, knowing that we have teachers who are working for us, that we have to compensate in a fair and just manner, knowing that we have to keep the facilities safe and looking good and all of those sorts of things. If we're going to be giving up the revenue, we've got to know there's a good reason for it, right? Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm saying we should know why we're doing it. Okay, so when we talk about how we actually figure these things out, right? Again, total fees and tuition divided by the enrollment, okay, that gives you the average. So you get a really affluent school, right? I worked these out with Dr. Tony Galla in LA. So some of these are sort of based around some LA numbers, but they are demonstrative of what we're talking about. Total income for for this St. Affluent school, right? 1.5 million. Fees are 140. Okay, we have enrollment of 330. What does that get us? Okay, that gives us an average revenue of $5,400 per student. Right? This is just, okay. Same thing, we go to a St. Humble. Okay, smaller school. The school's a little bit bigger from an area with more financial challenges. They're only bringing in $650. Their fees are $57. They get 330 kids there. Okay, they're only bringing in $2,100 per kid. Okay, these are numbers we need to know when we're figuring out the budgets. These are important. Okay, because they mean things as we move forward, especially when we get to the cash flow work. Okay, again, cost per pupil. What are the expenses? What do the division? Okay, again, we got 313 St. Affluent. We've got 1.9 in total expenses. Okay, there we go. Cost per pupil is 54. We do the difference, $800. Okay, per kid, which means that the cost per pupil is actually $6,200. We got a deficit of $200,000. Okay,
And that's real money, that's not pie in the sky, what if, that's real, actual money that you have to make up somehow.
right. Okay, this difference is $1,000. Okay, for more kids, right? They're only bringing in $3,000. Okay, this is they have to bring in an extra $100,000 to make this budget balance, right? At the end of the year, where does this money come from? Okay, and it comes from a whole variety of different places. Okay, but this number here is the one that we really need to be concerned about.
And that's even in this example, Matt, that the larger school has expenses that are almost half
Right.
the smaller school.
Exactly. You can't, right, when you look at this example, you can't say that these people are out there buying Ferraris and things for their kids to drive around in. You know, they have cut this thing down to the bone. Right? The problem is the amount of money that they're collecting in this tuition. Okay? Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can approach that 350, right? With mission-driven advancement efforts, with finding outside funding sources, scholarship programs. Iowa, I know, has a big parent choice initiatives and save. Did the ESAs pass? Do you have those?
No.
No, we have a school tuition organization
Yeah.
program, so
Okay.
CTO.
Tax credit money.
Tax credit money. Okay. So there's some advantages for the Iowa folks. Where we're at in Maryland, we don't have that, right? So there's a whole bunch of different avenues that we can get to it, okay? But you can't look at this example here and say, well, you got to cut. I'm not sure what there is to cut, right? You've got a school of 300 kids, for all expenses in to be $1 million. You might find $100,000, maybe, assuming nothing's old and broken and decrepit and that you've got to replace it. You might find $100,000 in that budget somewhere, but probably not.
And then it becomes a sliding scale equation where, well, we'll have to cut a teacher and we'll combine the some of the 8th grade. And that's a death sentence.
Yeah.
For most people, that school's gonna close because they're combining school. Now, some schools are established to have pods and have dual teachers for one teacher for 2 grades. If it's designed that way, that's great. But to suddenly change the paradigm and just do it overnight because, well, things are a little tight, it's death sentence. Schools don't bounce back from that. They say, oh, we'll build from below. Not happening. You don't get the opportunity to build from below.
So that's why when you start actually doing the math, and say has this British partner that's coming and he keeps saying to me, he's like, look, the maths is the maths is the maths. And I'm like, you're English, why are you putting an S on the end of that word? Yeah, but he's right. The math is the math. When you get down to it, you have expenses. You are collecting revenue. People want to be paid. Right? That's a fair and just thing. You have to do the math, right? As you figure these things out, and you've got to keep track of it as you go through the year. Are we on track? Are we collecting what we need to collect? Or are we going to get to the end of the year and say, Tracy, I need a little money to make this thing balance, right? Because people are going to, that time is gone. Those, in most places, maybe it's different here. I'll tell you, those conversations I had in Washington, The first thing the finance officer said was, look, at a big principals meeting, he said, the days of the priest calling up and saying, hey, Terry, listen, gonna need 50,000. Okay, Father, check's on the way, no problem. Done. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. We have to be self-sufficient, right? That doesn't mean we're not getting influence of money from the parishes, from diocesan scholarship programs. It means the plan is there. We know what those are in advance, and we know how we're going to get to these differences. Okay? So, are there questions on that? Are there questions on how we got there, how we're addressing these problems, how we're sort of finding ways to highlight these problems so that we can begin to address them?
And these next two slides are real simple. We're asking you to outline ways to align expenditure, our expected resources to desired student outcomes. Clearly, that's why we're in the business, right? That's why we're here. So, I would like you to jump to this next cell and say, these are the things that you must look at, or we're asking you to look at. And the next slide we're going to have is going to be like a small group discussion. And I'd even beg us to leave this up or look at it on your thing. If you don't have these processes in place, formally, appropriately, and of high quality, you're probably not running them as efficiently as you should or ought to. Do you have a manual of how your financial operations take place? Do you know when a check comes in, or when a donation is made, or when an expense must be paid, that there's a defined, it goes to this person, to this person, to this person, to out the door. It's signed by this person and this person, a stamp's put on and gone. This and this, we hit send on the computer, whatever it is. Do you have that, or is it willy-nilly? If it's willy-nilly, it's not going to be good, especially in today's market, when payment schedules are compressed. I find, unfortunately, when things get, quote, didn't realize I had that, or overlooked that, or misplaced that, that's a sign of much, much, much bigger problems. That's a symptom of the disease. It's not the disease itself. Okay? So please make sure that you have this. If you don't, call on one of us and we can probably share one of ours as an example. As Matt said, he had a budget like this, and he looked at this much of it, and it didn't do him well, and he was down in the office asking for cash. I think he said in November of his first year. If you get this much budget paper, look at it, know it, make sure that you can answer the questions. Again, going back to the communication piece, you better know it well enough to talk about it. You know, I know when you were a 7th grade history teacher, you knew everything there was to know about World War II. Any parent or any kid asking you a question about World War II, you were the expert at it because you were the teacher of that subject. But now, budget is a critical piece of your job. You better know it, be able to relate to it, and express it and explain it. Do you have a bookkeeper? Are you the bookkeeper? It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, you better know what that role constitutes in its entirety. Have it clearly defined. Sometimes I've seen schools, I have schools, I'm trying to stop it, but I have them, where the bookkeeper is also the person that runs development, also runs the milk money at lunch, also, does after-school care. Bless you. Oh my. Please stop. It's just too much. Bookkeeping is not a part-time gig. Bookkeepers shouldn't. I have this thing called cigar box bookkeepers. They open up the bottom drawer, they lift up in the cigar case. Yeah, we're okay this week. Close it, show it. That's not what you want. Volunteers are wonderful people. Some volunteers have been in school 20 plus years. God love them all. Please find another job for them. Or put them on the payroll so they're accountable. Okay, they have to be accountable for what they're responsible for. They have to be. And the only way to do that is to have an honest employee doing honest work. Okay. Bill paying process, I talked about that here. When a check comes or an invoice comes in, what's the process so it doesn't get overlooked or misplaced? Financial reports. They should be shared among pastor, your finance board, perhaps parish council. Yes, yes, and yes. But then an executive summary of that, as we talked about earlier with communications, ought to be given out to the people at large, to your constituent groups, especially those that you're going to ask for help from. Again, not the nuts and bolts and dirt and dirty and of who's getting paid what, but it's executive overview of where you stand, showing perhaps there's a gap and that's why we're coming to you for help, or not a gap in case, hey, we're doing great, we're going to be here for the next 30 years, so you want to get on board with us? Is there anybody that's constantly, as Matt said, he was looking at certain reports daily and certain reports monthly. we talked about having a finance board meeting in 6 weeks. And, you know, on the 5th week, you start looking at it, probably not a good idea. Who's responsible for monitoring that and keeping up on it? And when something comes up like cash flow that is contrary to what you need to do to operate, they bring it to your attention, raise the flag, oh, we're having a little problem here. 4 families just bailed out on paying their bill this week. We're not gonna have enough money for fill in the blank. You gotta have somebody watching that. Because if not, it's gonna snowball up on you real quick. And I've already said this, communicate those finances to your stakeholders. And again, an executive summary format. You don't have to give them the nuts and bolts of Mrs. Smith who makes $27,500, you know? That's not what we're looking for, but just an overview of where you stand. Because when you have gaps, people understand you're doing good work. People want us to help and support you do your good work. But if you say, give me money because I need it, that's kind of a hard request. Can you give me money because we're exactly $17,500 short this month? And because we're $17,500 short, we're gonna need to cut this or not do that? I don't want those teachers. Those teachers are great teachers. I don't want them not to get, okay, fine here. Or here's my portion of the $17,500 that I can give you. If you have bona fide, verifiable numbers in that regard, you'll be in much better shape. Okay?